Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another video for you. I got another part in the Memory series, which is my personal story of playing World of Warcraft way back in the day. We've made some steady progress in this series, but it's been a bit since the last one, so let me give you a quick refresher. On the last episode of Mad Season Ball Z, we covered the early raiding experience, and we just started the Molten Core. I'm playing my Holy Paladin as Retribution spec with Strength gear. No, that wasn't what you were supposed to do, but I was able to buff at least, which was good enough at the time. We've killed our first boss, which was Lucifron. We went over all the drama that went with being in a raiding guild back then, with the dreaded DKP system and whatnot. Talked about some of my shenanigans, how I was a bit of a troublemaker, and my first purple, which were the Lawbringer bracers. So, continuing where we left off here, we went through the Molten Core and made slow but steady progress. Eventually, the endless buffing did wear on me and my paladin friend Liquid. I don't know, I guess the complex and intricate gameplay was getting a little too stimulating for us, so as we were going through the Molten Core, we were leveling alts. At this point, you can probably tell that I had a taste for damage and DPS. Not really healing or tanking, but I was stuck healing and buffing since no one really wanted a Retribution Paladin for raiding back then. So I went through the class list looking for a pure DPS class, a new character, and a new adventure. I wanted a class that was incapable of healing or tanking period, and paying close attention to the raiding scene, I picked a rogue which had the highest damage, at least for our guild. This time I switched it up, and I went human, which actually turned out to be a pretty good choice with how the weapon skills worked, since they had a bonus with them. Though I mainly picked them because I wanted something other than dwarf, and to start seeing the other races' questing areas. My buddy Liquid actually made the same thing, a human rogue, and whenever we weren't raiding, we were leveling. This time was much faster, of course, because we had a good idea of what zones to go to, what dungeons to do. No longer was I spamming dungeons because I didn't know where any of the quests were. I was serious this time and did all of the good quests, skipped the ones that weren't worth it, like the escort quests and whatnot, and we made it to 60 pretty quickly compared to my paladin. Rogues were also pretty quick to level since they did so much damage, so that definitely helped too. So we hit 60, and we told our officers that we wanted to switch. I think we were pretty lucky because they just happened to be looking for more rogues at this point. They probably looked at me and said, well, he can't be any worse than his paladin, so give him a shot. And this was where I really shined, I think. Now, I don't want to say that I was ever really good at the game. I've always been pretty average, but I'd say back then, just because everyone sucked, I thought I did pretty well in comparison. All of the rogues in the guild did pretty well actually, and we'd lend out advice to other raiding guilds on how to gear up and do damage and whatnot, because this was still before anything like Icy Veins, I want to say. Players more often than not had to figure out things for themselves, and we were pretty good. I want to do a quick name drop here and roll call, which you might find boring, but I want to do it more for my friends out there if they're watching this. Now, our best rogue was probably our Grand Marshal in Haber. As some of you know, I'm sure, the rank 14 grind was pretty insane back then. It required 24/7 play pretty much since you were competing against other people on your server, but as a reward, you were able to buy some pretty insane gear. So he was probably the best because he had the Grand Marshal swords, and he also knew the class very well. He did have to throw out his computer chair though after he hit rank 14, because he started like melding into it with the caked up grease and sweat and whatnot. It was pretty gross. I had another friend named Stoofers, and I'd say he was probably second in place. He was human as well, so he did a lot of damage with their plus weapon skill ratio. And third place probably went to me. Like I said, at this point, I was a madman, and I was playing a lot, studying up on my class, practicing my rotation and whatnot, and I did pretty good, I think. After that was probably our raid leader, who was named Loraith. After that, though, is anyone's guess. I don't really pay attention to anyone under number 4 since my damage meter didn't go down that far, but we also had one of our officers, Los, the guy hit with the snowball, and he was alright. He definitely tried, which deserved merit. The rogues in our guild were very tight-knit though, and we watched each other's back and worked together in gearing each other up. And for the most part, we still play to this day. So, I'm now a rogue, and this pretty much became my main character for the rest of vanilla, and even for a few expansions. I loved their high damage, the ability to stealth, pickpocket, open lockboxes, you know, all that roguey stuff. And to top it all off, they couldn't heal or tank, so I was good to go. I was combat spec specifically for PvE, since that did the most damage back then, I think. It held its own in PvP too, but every once in a while, if I'd take a break from raiding, I'd switch on over to Assassination spec and spend some time in Battlegrounds. This was also back when rogues could kill some classes, such as mages or warlocks, in like 5 seconds with some lucky crits. Just take a look at some of the old school rogue PvP videos, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I didn't get as far as my friend. I stopped at Lieutenant Commander, which was rank 10. That was still a pretty good time investment, but it really started to pick up after that, and you'd pretty much have to play 24/7 to get rank 14, which was Grand Marshal. I liked the game, but I didn't like it that much. Rank 10 completed the blue set, which was enough for me, so from there I just PvP'd casually. I actually did make a few PvP videos back in the day, but as far as I can tell, those are gone forever since the site I uploaded them to is gone, and my old computer is long gone. Those were the first videos I made though, and I'm sure they were garbage. Not much has changed, huh? But when I was raiding, I was back to the combat spec. We pushed and pushed through the Molten Core, and really started to work through those bosses up until the point where we had everything but Ragnaros on farm. And that's because he needed a lot of fire resistance, if you didn't know, and we progressed fast enough to where that kind of snuck up on us. Remember, there were 40 people at this point, and it's classic. Having these 40 people get 200 something fire resistance was easier said than done, and it took at least a month. It took high level and low level dungeons to find all of the right pieces, lots of globetrotting, and time. I remember we used to farm a piece off of this guy in the Blackrock Depths. We would get 5 rogues together in a group and just stealth through the whole place, kill them, and reset over and over. So, the first resist fight here, and my guild in particular, wouldn't even let you in until he had at least 200 something. The raiding scene was very different back then. If I had to sum it up, it was very specific. Nowadays, for most content, when you're making a group, typically you have 2 tanks, maybe 3 or 4 healers, and the rest DPS, and that's it. But back then, you specifically wanted warrior tanks, a lot of rogue DPS, at least a couple of hunters for tranquilizing shot to dispel enrages, resist gear, a few warlocks for banish or else you couldn't do fights like Gar, mages for water basically, a few paladins for buffing. If you didn't pay careful attention when you were setting up these raids, you would have no chance on some of these fights. It's one of the bigger arguments against current versus vanilla or Burning Crusade raiding, I think. Some people love it and some people hate it. Hopefully soon, everyone will be happy and we'll get some news about those classic servers. So, we got all of our resistances squared away, and it was time for the final boss of the Molten Core and the Lord of the Fire Realm, Ragnaros. I think in the last video, I mentioned that at the end of the day, the mechanics in the Molten Core were pretty simple. A little fun fact is that this place was actually made in 1 week. The zone, the bosses, the loot, all put together in just 7 days right before release, and they almost scrapped it since they almost ran out of time. While they did an amazing job, you can kind of see some side effects of this. You had the Mind Control Salamander, the Rain of Fire Salamander, the Arcane Explosion Salamander, and so on. Lots of copies, and with it being the first big raid, it wasn't too hard to figure out what to do, and the only challenge was that everyone was new at the time. So, I want to say that Ragnaros was the first complex boss fight in the game, not counting Onyxia. He actually had phases, which was unique at the time. You had the phase where he was above ground, you had to have a tank in melee range or else he'd nuke the raid, and he'd also periodically AoE the melee, and you'd have to time your DPS and jump out at the right time or else you'd get sent flying up in the air and take a lot of damage. Melee in and melee out is a phrase that's forever burned into my memory. He would also have constant area fire damage, which was why everyone needed that resist, not just the tanks, and periodically he'd submerge into the lava and summon some mana draining adds that the tanks would scramble to pick up aggro on. The ranged would be all over the place trying to avoid them. Aggro was tougher to get in general back then, so everyone would be running everywhere. It was pretty chaotic. As a result, there were lots of deaths, of course. Again, due to everyone being new, and this was also before YouTube, so we couldn't simply look up a video on how exactly the fight worked. It took us a month probably of real attempts to take him out, and I remember our first kill, we had a hunter named Calandros as the only one alive out of the 40 people, and he miraculously killed him with one final shot. The TeamSpeak exploded in a huge nerdgasm. It was like the climax of a movie, and he has no problem retelling this story even today. Kind of like those old war vets going back in my day, but just a bit more nerdy. But with that, we had conquered the Molten Core, in the most epic fashion possible at that. This was quite the proud moment for me. I started at level 1 with no idea what I was doing, bounced around from class to class, and somehow made it to level 60, with the majority of it as a holy DPS paladin. I slowly but surely conquered all of the dungeons the game had to offer, and here I was in a 40-man guild with our first clear of the Molten Core. I believe we were one of the first 5 alliance guilds to take him out, which was impressive at the time because we started raiding late. Remember, I only started playing in March of 2005, and it took me a couple of months to level, so we only would have started at around May of 2005 at the earliest, I think. So plenty of guilds were raiding before us, but we beat a lot of them out because we had good leadership and coordination. And also, it was Khadgar on the US, which was one of the slowest progression servers, so that definitely helped. Alright, that's it for this one, I guess. I've officially made the switch to Rogue. We finally cleared through all of the Molten Core pretty quickly at that. Now, I thought I was going to wrap up Vanilla in this episode, but we still got a whole lot more to cover. We have the Onyxia's Lair, the Blackwing Lair, AQ40, Naxxramas, and a bunch of stories to go along with those, so we probably got a few more videos in the vanilla portion of this series. So, in the next one, we'll probably cover some Onyxia stuff, some Blackwing Lair, and who knows what else. I hope you found the video interesting or entertaining. Like it if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.